In this video, I'm going to show you how to create a terrain for a new game. And I started to show this in class, and I'm going to review it. And then I'm going to show you how to create some custom textures. If I play my scene here, you can see that I have the terrain that I've created here with some mountains and grass and trees. There's some textures on the ground. And I've created some custom textures here for a cobblestone road, and I've also got some for some sand. And these are texture maps that I created inside of Photoshop and Maya. So we're going to look at how to download some textures from places like Wild Textures, and also textures that you might take yourself, and then how to make them seamless inside of Photoshop so that you can then create a bump map texture like I have here. So this is the main map, and this is the bump map, and then bringing those into Maya to create the actual bumpiness, and then how to make that into a normal map that you can then import back into Unity to use on your terrains. So here you can see the color map and the normal map on the right side in my inspector. So I want to begin by showing you how to create this terrain. So I want to go ahead and go to File, New Scene. Now I'm not creating a new project. We can continue with the project that we had from the last videos, and I've already imported the standard assets package from the Unity store, and you can go back and look at those videos if you haven't done that. And that's going to have some things in it that we want to use when we're creating a terrain. So there's an environment package in there, an environment folder that has some water in it, and also some terrain assets and surface textures that's going to be useful to get started with this. Also, I'm going to create my own folder and call it My Textures, and you're going to place your textures that you make into this folder so that you can then use them in your terrain. I also provided a class assets package that is on Canvas that will give you some extra assets for skyboxes and other things that you might want to use when you're creating an environment. So there's some models in there, there's some skyboxes, and then there's also some other textures and things that we'll use. So definitely import that package as well, and then you'll be ready to start making a terrain. So if I'm going to create a terrain, I'm going to go to the Create menu inside of the hierarchy 3D object, and I'm going to make a terrain. And it's going to be created with the lower left corner at the 0, 0 axis. So if I say zoom in on my main camera here, you can see that the main camera is right there looking towards where the 0 axis is, and that's actually where my directional light is as well. But the corner of the terrain is there. So that's not really very useful for us if we want to be able to sort of sculpt a terrain and have everything that we create at the 0 axis point be kind of in the middle of that terrain. So we want to move that terrain over. You do that by selecting the terrain, and you're going to go look at the top, and it should be created at 0, 0, 0 in position and rotation so that it's in the place that it is originally created, and you're going to have to move it off of that original spot. And right below that is your terrain tools, and there are several tools here. There's 5 of them. And on the very right one that looks like a cog icon, we want to click on that and then go find where it says the width and length of the terrain. And for that, it's set to 1,000 by default here. I want to change that to 500. It's going to be really big at 1,000. 500 is still going to be big compared to our camera and our directional light and eventually a character controller that we put in there. So 500 by 500 is big enough to start with. You could even start smaller than that. But we'll go ahead and start with that. And then once you do that, that's going to scale it down a little bit. And we want to take half of that number and move it in the negative X and Z axes. So if I do negative 250 in X, it's going to push it over to halfway on the X for that 500 width. And then for the length, if I type in negative 250 in Z, it's going to move it halfway in the length from the 500 length. So if we plug those two numbers in, it's going to place us actually right in the middle of the plane for where the main camera is. And we're not going to use this main camera anyway. We're going to use a first-person controller. But before we drag that in here, we'll go ahead and add some stuff to this plane. So you can see that I can see in my game view the terrain really well. And I'm going to go ahead and do a couple of other things that I want to do to start working with the terrain. I'm going to go back to the terrain again, to the cog icon, and then I'm going to switch to the paintbrush icon. So that's actually for painting on the terrain. And the way this tool works, it's the second tool from the left. The first tool, by the way, is for appending new terrain. So if I zoom it out in my view, you can see you can't even see the grid anymore. It's a very big terrain. But if I click on that first one and I hover over it, it actually gives me different quadrants on each of the sides of this terrain that I could add another 500 by 500 terrain. So you could keep adding to this terrain if you wanted to, if you didn't have enough. But I think this is going to be enough for us. And then we'll go to the paint tool, which is to the right of that. And we want to switch from whatever it's on. It's probably on paint texture, or it might be on raise and lower terrain. You want to go to where it says set height, because I want to actually push the terrain up. Right now it's being set at a height of 0, which is as low as you can go on a terrain. So this is the base height. And then I actually would like to be able to paint so that I'm not just pulling up terrain, but I'm also pushing down terrain. And if you want to be able to do that, then you have to set a height above 0. So if I were to put in, say, 25, 30, something like that, even 20 would be fine. It depends on how deep you want to be able to paint down for making valleys and like rivers and things like that. So if I type in to the height setting, let's say 25, and I hit flatten all, the whole thing pops up 25 units. So it disappeared in my game view because my camera's actually underneath it now. If I go to the main camera and I put on my move tool and start moving up in the y-axis, which is the green one, you'll eventually see that I pop through the middle of the terrain and I can see it again. And the reason I don't see it when I go underneath it is because the terrain has its normals on the top side, and only the side that has normals will be rendered in the game view. And that saves on computation when the game is running. So you don't see surfaces from their back side in the game view, and it will just disappear if you have a plane and you look at the bottom side of it. So we want to be above that plane so we can see it with our camera. And then I want to go in and start painting on that terrain, and I pushed it 25 units up. So I'm going to go back now to my terrain and go to the paintbrush tool again. And I don't need to be in set height anymore. I've set it to 25 and I've flattened all, so it moved up 25 units. And I don't want to hit that again because it will actually flatten it again. So once you start painting, you don't want to accidentally hit that button again. So I'll go to switch from set height to raise and lower terrain. And for that, I want to start painting on the surface to pull up mountains and push down valleys. And since I'm starting off, I think I'd like to make something like an island. So I'm going to define the edges of the island first using one of these tools. I could go with this one, which has sort of a hard edge, or I could go with this one, which has a little softer edge, which will have more of a fall off. Whichever one you want, it depends on whether you want steep edges or more gradient on your edges. And you want to make your brush size so that you can get along the edge of this without being too small. You want to push down whatever you want to push down for the edges of your island. That's what you want to do here. And I'm going to go ahead and pull my opacity all the way up to 100%. And then to actually push it down, that's actually going to, if I were to paint on this, it would pull up a mountain. I'm going to hit Control Z to undo. I want to actually hold Shift down, which actually changes the look of this preview circle here in the 3D view. And I'm going to go ahead and let's make this a little bigger. And I'm going to push the edges of this down. Now, if you want to look straight down on this, actually I'll do a little bit and then we'll switch the view. So I'm holding Shift down and I'm going to press the edge down. And you can see that it's pressing this edge down. And if I click on the top view here, then I can zoom out a little bit and I can just go around the whole edge here. So I'm just going to press the whole edge and sort of define kind of a shape for my island, whatever I want that to be. I want all the edges though to be all the way down at the bottom because I don't want to see the edge of my island. I don't want to see the edge. So once I get all the side parts down, I could make that a little smaller and maybe shape some things. So maybe I want a little separate island right here. And you know, we could also pull our opacity down, and you could pull up little separate islands too by not holding Shift down. So actually that pulled up a little mountain there. And then we could also hold Shift down and maybe come in here and create like a little river that comes in. And goes to maybe a little lake or something with an island in the middle of it. And you can see that the it's it's pushing it down quite a lot, and it's pretty steep in the game view. You can see it's pretty steep. You might want to go in and pull your opacity down a little bit, and you can then hit it to get a little bit more gradual places that are not quite as steep. Maybe we want a little beach there. And then we can start messing with these other brushes that are going to give us a little bit more variation in the look of it. So we can stamp a little bit there and create a little bit of a hilliness. We can grab these ones here and go a little bit further and create a little bit of bumpiness. We can hold our shift down and create some little bit of push some areas down a little bit there. And pull some areas up a little bit as well. So all of these things are going to have different effects depending on how you use them. And the more you add little variations and stuff in it, the more interesting it's going to look when you eventually look at it from more of a on-the-ground point of view. So if I were to grab my main camera there and rotate it around, I could look around and see what it looks like that I did. So let me just actually orbit a little bit. And we'll zoom in, and then I'll let's just raise the camera up a little bit so I can see a little bit more, and then we'll rotate it and look around. So you can see that we're just creating little hills and stuff and valleys. And we can add some more things. Let's say I want to look this way. So I'm looking towards that sort of plane right there. And I'm going to pull up a volcano type of thing. So if I switch over here and I go back to my raise and lower the terrain, I want to actually I'm going to switch to set height again, but I'm not going to use the flatten all button. I'm just going to set a height. In this case, the base, the sort of the ground height here is actually at 25. So let's set 50 height, and that's going to be my limit. And then I'm going to go over to this one right here, and I'm going to try to size it so that it's going to fit within that area. And then I'm just going to paint there, and see it's going to hit it's going to hit that height. Now maybe 50 is not really high enough. Let's go more like 100. And so if I again go there and I keep pressing on it, at some point it's going to hit that 100 height and flatten out to a plateau. And then what I could do is I could change my brush size to be smaller, and I want it small enough to go within the top of that. And then I'll go ahead and pull the opacity up a little bit, and I want to hold the shift key down, and we can also we can set it back to say height of 20, and then I'll go and hold the shift key down and press on there. Actually, don't hold the shift key down. Put 20 in there and then press on it. So you don't have to hold the shift key down in this particular one to, it's going to go to whatever height you set. So I set 20, so that's actually much lower. That's even a little lower than the height of the ground. So now I can sort of carve out the top of that. And then we could put some other brushes on there and maybe this thing exploded out kind of in this direction right here. So I could go in and use this brush to sort of push that down like it exploded out that way. And that's becoming kind of interesting in the 3D view there. And then I could switch back to the raise and lower, and I could either use that same brush or use a different one, and then just add a little bit to the side here so it looks like something came out in that direction. Okay, so we've added a little bit of a volcano type of effect there. So the more you go in and use the different brushes to sort of add a little bit of texture to the ground, the more realistic it's going to look. Add some of those variations there. And if, say, you pick one and it's too much or it's kind of too sharp, let's say I do that to raise that part up. Let's see, I want to find one that's going to give me some spiky effects. If I pull the opacity up, it'll probably do that. So let's say I get that spiky effect right there, but it's too spiky. Then I can switch to the smooth height and maybe a different brush, and then go over that and soften that back down again. All right. So that can be like the lava that came out of this volcano. So all of those things are things that are going to produce different interesting effects on the ground plane. Let me just orbit around here. Oh, I'm in smooth height, yeah. So I'm just smoothing that. I just want to pull up a little bit there. Maybe we pull up a little bit more over there. And then again, if you want to smooth that back out, if it's too spiky, you can switch to another brush and go over that and it'll smooth that back out. Okay, so that gives me some texture to my different areas here that I'm working on. So what I want to do is actually find an area that I can sort of position my character controller on. Maybe somewhere around here in this area. I'm going to go ahead and let's flatten that area out a little bit. So I'm going to go back and smooth that area a little bit, and maybe also push it down a little bit so I have a little valley there. And I'd like to maybe create a smoother area over there that I can sort of just stick him on a little hill there. So, or maybe it should be on this side. Anyway, I'm going to find a place. We'll just drag out a character controller. And what I want for this is going to be it's in standard assets. And under characters, I'm going to go into the first person controllers and into prefabs. And I want to pull out the FPS controller. I don't know how I got these textures actually into my FPS controller. I think one of the packages I imported put it in this folder for some reason, but I'd probably want to move those out of there. But I'll go ahead and leave them there for now. Let's go ahead and pull this FPS controller prefab into the scene. And I think I'll drop it maybe right. Yeah, let's drop it right here, actually. So you can see it's very small. If I zoom in on it, it's a very it's supposed to be set up for like a person that's around 6 foot, and it's very small on this terrain. So if I place it in here, I do want to like find a good spot for it so that I can actually see things well. And maybe something, I'll just move it a little bit over this way. You can see it's going into the geometry. We don't want that. We want it to be above. And it's okay if you put your FPS controller kind of a little bit up in the air if you want to, because when you start the game, it's gonna drop anyway. So if I place it a little higher up, I can see my mountains and stuff a little bit more while I'm working. And maybe whatever area you're going to work on, let's say I'm going to work on this area right here where the volcano and stuff is. That's where you want to have your character controller looking, because it's your camera now. And you want it to be able to see whatever it is you're working on. You also want to go and grab your directional light, and you might need to double click it. It's going to be somewhere in the middle of your scene, so it might be more useful for you to switch from local to global and just like move it where it's a little closer to where you're working on the surface and where your character controller is, so that if you want to rotate it, it'll be there and you don't have to go searching for it every time. It doesn't really matter where the position of this is. All that matters is the rotation of it. And you can see I'm getting a lot of shadow on that, and I don't really want it to be that shaded. So I'm going to go ahead and rotate this light a little bit. I probably want to go back to local so I can see what the local rotation is, and maybe maybe I'll rotate it up a little bit more and this way. So I have quite a bit of there we go. I have quite a bit of mountains and things here, so it can shade a lot if I'm not careful. But I do want to see the texture maps, so it would be good for me not to have too much shadow on those. So that looks pretty good. I want to be able to see the topology there, and you can adjust the color of the light if you want to, but I'm going to leave it the way it is. Now we also set some other things in class, and something that you might want to set is a skybox. So I'm going to mention that now. If you want to set a skybox, right now it's on the default skybox, which is just like a gradient. But if you want a nice skybox, we imported some in the class assets, and you can, there is a folder in there called skyboxes. It's got several different skyboxes in there, and if we actually go and look in some of the skyboxes, this is what they look like. They're 6 images, one for each side of a box. And you put the skybox, it's a big box that's going to surround the whole scene, but it renders it in a way that it doesn't show the edges of the box. And so if I were to add that skybox in there, I'd go to Window, and then I go to Rendering and Lighting Settings. And the lighting settings are what's going to allow me to add a skybox at the very top, skybox material under environment. It's using the default skybox. If I click to the little dot, which is to the right of that, I can go choose a skybox that I have in my assets somewhere. And these aren't all skyboxes, so they're not all going to be something you can use. But there are 3 sunny 1, 2, and 3 skyboxes that we could use that will give us different kinds of bright skies. There is an overcast skybox, which looks kind of nice. There's a couple of those. There is one called Eerie Skybox, which has kind of a bluish tone. Now, each one of these skyboxes, there's a dawn dusk, which has a nice kind of a look to it. Each one of these skyboxes is going to color your scene because it becomes the light in your scene. So if you use a bright one, it's going to give you bright light in your scene. And if you use one of the eerie ones or the dusk ones, it's going to give you a darker looking scene. So I'll go ahead and use the sunny one for now. So when you look at it, the environment lighting, the source of that is the skybox, and that's why it changes the mood and the look of your scene when you choose a different skybox. You can also set your sun source to be your directional light. It didn't come up when I clicked on the little circle next to it, but I can there's a none light here. I can just left mouse button drag the directional light over and drop it into that particular area, and it will set that as my sun. So now I've got a very different look to my whole scene because of the skybox. It's much brighter. And then to cover the whole scene in a texture, I'm going to switch back to the terrain. I'm going to go to the little brush tool, and I'm going to switch from raise or lower terrain to paint texture. And you can see I've got a couple of textures kind of loaded in here from what I used before. But you probably don't have anything. To start painting, you want to go to Edit Terrain Layers and create a layer. And this is going to be like layers in Photoshop, where you are painting on layers and it's got transparency around it and it's mixing them together on the terrain. And so I'm going to choose to begin with just a simple sand albedo, and it came with the standard assets. It doesn't have a normal map, but it's so small that, and it's kind of uniform, that it doesn't really make that much of a difference that it doesn't have a normal map. I'm going to click on the y-axis in the global 3D view, and that will make it so that I look straight down on this terrain, and zoom out with my wheel a little bit. I'm holding Alt and middle mouse button to drag, and then I want to take this sand albedo texture. I clicked on it to activate it. It opens it up so you can see the different layers on it. I don't really need to adjust those right now, but I do need to adjust the size. Actually, I'll leave the size the way it is, and I'll make the brush really big, and I'll make it 100%. And I'll just paint over the whole thing. And you can see that now I've got that sand texture over the whole thing, but it's really, really small. So it's a good color, but you won't see much texture because it's so small at 2 by 2, which is the size of the tiling. So it's tiling this texture. It's what's called a seamless texture, and it tiles it over and over again. I'm going to make that more like 20 by 20. So I'm just going to put a 0 in there, 20 by 20. And now you can see some of the actual texture in my camera view on the hills that are close to me. And if I play this, then I can actually see those really, really well because I drop down to the ground. And if I walk, it'll show me everything in my scene. And I can see that texture on there. It may be a little big at 20 by 20 because it's really noticeable when I'm close to it. So you might want to adjust that a little smaller than that, maybe 15 by 15. So I could do that by going in and just going back to the terrain again. Now you notice that the terrain kind of got grayed out. In this particular version of 2019.211, there's a little bug that will happen. You'll get a little warning down on the command line that says that it has to rebuild the editor or something like that for the terrain. So it's an easy fix of just click somewhere else and click back on the terrain again, and it will rebuild that terrain editor, and you can make any edits you need to make. I'm going to switch this down a little smaller to like 15 by 15. And that might just look a little better when I'm on the ground. Now I'm also getting another warning that says there are 2 audio listeners in my scene, and that's because I left my main camera in here. And I noticed when I went in and walked around with my FPS controller that I couldn't hear my footsteps. So that's probably because of this error that's coming from having 2 audio listeners. I'm going to delete the main camera, because cameras have audio listeners on them, and the first person character, which is child to the first person controller, where the camera is, that has an audio listener on it. So there's only supposed to be one of those in the scene. If I needed both those cameras, I could delete the audio listener from whatever is the least important camera, and that would probably be what was the main camera or some other camera that I might be using. So I'm going to go ahead and take a look at that again and see if it looks a little better. And now I hear my footsteps. So I think that looks pretty good. I'll leave that at 15 by 15. Now I want to create some other things in here. The first thing that I'm going to create, I do want to put more texture maps, but before I do that, I'm going to put some water in here. So in the standard assets that we downloaded, there is a environment folder, and that environment folder has some water folders in it. And I'm going to click into just the one that says water, and there's a water and a water 4. I'm going to pull out just the basic water. And if I go into that, you'll find a prefab, and there's a Water Pro daytime and a Water Pro nighttime. I'm going to pull the Water Pro daytime into my scene because I have a day scene. My skybox is a day skybox. I tried to drop it kind of in the middle, but I'm going to go ahead and go to my cog icon in the inspector next to transform on that Water Pro daytime object and reset it so it goes completely to the middle of the scene. And it's really small right now, so I'm going to go ahead in that top view. I'm going to switch to the scale icon, and I'm going to click on the middle of it. I'm going to scale that whole thing up. So you might need to orbit around to make sure that you're hitting the middle of it. But I'm looking for this orange circle, which indicates where the water is. And I want to make it slightly bigger than my terrain. Also, I'm going to switch to the Move tool, and I'm going to find the green arrow, which is the Y, and I'm going to start pulling it up in Y until I start to actually see some water as it intersects the ground plane. I could make it go, if I go too far, if I go under it, it's going to disappear because the normals are on the top of the water. But I want it to just intersect with some of those areas down there. If I hit play again now and I look around, I can see that there's some water down there now. And it's got some movement on it. And it's got reflections. So it's got some refractions and it's got some reflections. Actually, I can see in the top view that it's on refraction. And if I go look at the inspector, I can see that in the components there it's set on refractive. If I were to switch it to reflective, it would not be see-through anymore. It actually gives it a little bit of a color, and it's just going to reflect the mountains. And you can set some things on it. It doesn't have a whole lot of parameters. There are other waters that have more parameters than this. But I may want to go ahead and leave it at that so that I can see it a little better. I think the refractive one, it was a little bit hard to see. So my FPS controller, I might want to adjust it if it seems like, you know, I'm going to be walking a lot every time to get to the area that I actually want to see. Maybe I want to move it a little bit so that I can see better the area I'm trying to look at. So I want to work on this area right here. If I hit play, I'm going to drop down onto the ground, and this is the area I'm going to be creating some things on. So I want to go ahead and save this at this point. I'm going to do a save as, and we'll call this terrain demo video 1. And we'll put it in our scenes folder. You can see I've got other scenes in there. Let's go ahead and save that. And then what I want to do is I've got my water in there and I've got my skybox. I want to keep working on the terrain and add some more things to it. I do want to have some other materials on this terrain. So I'm going to go to Edit Terrain Layers again, and I'm going to create a new layer. And this time I'm going to do the cliff albedo, and we'll select it. And there is actually a normal map for that. So I'm going to go into where it says normal map and select, and I'm going to find the cliff albedo normal, which is right here, cliff normals. And I double click on that. And a normal map is 3 colors, green, blue, and red. It ends up looking kind of purplish. And those 3 colors are going to tell the program how to bump that surface, how to create the look of a bumpy surface, because it's not really changing the geometry at all. It's just creating some shading effects in order to make it look a little bumpy by making it look like it has some highlights in certain areas. So if I want to paint around this area right here, I'm going to kind of zoom in on it. And I want to go ahead and choose the size of it. I know 2 by 2 is going to be way too small. If I paint on it at that size, you'll see kind of what it's going to look like. Let's try that. So I'll paint a little bit right here at that size. And you'll see it looks like a moire pattern. It really doesn't look very good, and that's because the size is so small that you can see the repetitive patterns in it. So I need to bring this up to a much larger size, maybe like 30 by 30. And now it looks like rock. It has that kind of rocky look to it, almost like volcano type of look. And that's kind of what I wanted. So you could just hit it full strength in some places and less in other places, but that's going to give me a little bit of that rocky look. So maybe that's the rocky area right there. And then it's going to get more sandy over here near the beach. And then maybe I'll have some grass and other it'll kind of transition to grass as it gets off of that rock. So those are what you're going to want to kind of mix together. And the more you go in here and mix this together, if I edit terrain layers and create another layer and then find a different one that's going to have, say, a mixture of rock and grass. So I've got this grass rock right here. That also came in with the standard assets, and it doesn't have a normal map by default. I did create one for it, and I'll show you how to do that. But I'm going to paint that right around here like it's going to transition, and maybe a little bit on the side of this mountain as well. So make sure you select it. You need to create a size for it. Let's do like 15 by 15 maybe. And then I'll paint a little bit using one of these brushes. And if you don't put it all the way up, the opacity all the way up, then it's going to mix it in a little bit. So I'd like to maybe mix it in a few places here. We can make the brush pretty small and have some areas that it's more mixed in, and then we can kind of zoom into this area here and put a little bit more as it's kind of coming out into this area. We can orbit around, hit some on this side over here, kind of coming down to where there's some sand. Mix it in a little bit with the rock, maybe around that area. We can pull this all the way up and put it full strength in some places. And then if we decide, oh, well, we went too far and we want to mix the rock one in a little bit more, we can go back and switch to the rock one and go and paint a little bit of that in there. So I'm mixing this in as it's kind of coming out into this area. I'll go back to this one and paint a little bit into that area. You might want to change my brush to some other brush and just kind of have that in there a little bit. So again, I can then add another one, just edit terrain layers, create layer, and then go find maybe a grass one. So I've got this grass hill right here. I could select that. Again, this comes from standard assets. It doesn't have a normal map, but I could then mix some grass into this area. And again, it's sized really small, so I might want to put that up a little bit. Again, maybe 15 by 15. And you can see it looks better when I do that. And then we have some grass coming out into this area. So maybe this is our grassy area right here. And we have sand along the edge there. And we could put some grass in some other places. Maybe over here there's a little bit of grass in some of these areas. Maybe right up here. Maybe even a little bit on the side of the mountain there, or down towards the bottom of the mountain. Maybe there's a lot of grass over here on this little island. So we've been putting some different grass effects and texture effects around, and we can go in and take a look at that here in a second and see what that looks like by just clicking our play button and looking around. And you can see it's starting to look like a terrain. You can see the big difference between a texture map that has a normal map on it, like those mountain textures, and these other ones that don't have normal maps on them. It does make a big difference. Now, I did make a normal map for this rocky grass texture. So we could go and select that. This grass rock texture, I have a normal map for it, but it is a very low resolution map. But as soon as I put it on, you should see something happen to make that a little bit more bumpy. But it's not quite as good as the other map, and I've got it mixed with this grass stuff, so you can see a little bit of it there. In this area, we've got a little bit of that bumpiness, but the grass texture that I have on here does not have any normal map on it. So it kind of looks like something in Ireland or something where it's a lot of moss and stuff. Okay, so we'll go ahead and save that. And the next thing that I want to add here is some trees. So I'm going to go back to my terrain, and there's a couple of other tools here. There's one that looks like trees. There's one that looks like grass. I'm going to add some trees. So the next one to the right, it looks like trees. We'll click on it. We'll go to Edit Trees, and I'm going to add a tree. And you get this window that says None Game Object. And then you have to click to the right of it on the little circle. It'll show you all the game objects in your scene that you've imported in all your packages. So if you imported standard assets and the class assets, you'll find some trees in here. And so there's some broadleaf trees, there's something called big tree, there's a conifer, and then down here there's a palm. I'm going to go ahead and grab the palm, add that in, and we'll go ahead and add some palms in this area here, kind of going down to my beach. You want to look at the tree density. It's set by default pretty high, and I don't really like to add too many trees all at once. So I'm going to pull that down. You also have a tree height that you might want to, it's actually a range that will give you a range of different heights. And if having that variety and randomizing it, having that checked, is going to actually make it look a little better as you get more trees. And so if I click in here, let's say right around this area, I should get some trees. And actually I got quite a few trees on the side of that mountain. So if the density is still too high, I'll pull it down a little bit more. And let's click down here a little bit and add a few more. And we are getting some variations and variety in there. I still think it's a little bit too many, so I'm going to pull it down a little bit more and add some over here. And we can also add some right there. Now, if I hold Shift down, I can actually remove ones that I've added. So maybe I don't want ones right in this area, or maybe I got too many going up that hill. I'll click there and it'll take those away. If I don't want it to take that many away, I can just make my brush size a little smaller and hold the Shift down again and try to just click right there and just remove a few. Maybe just those two I want to remove. And then we'll take a look at it by hitting play, and we'll look around and see what these palm trees look like. And then we can add other trees too. Let's add some more trees. So again, I'll click off to the side and go back to the terrain again to refresh the editor. And then I'm going to go to Edit Trees, Add Tree. I'm going to choose another tree. Let's do the conifer. I'll add that. Make sure it's highlighted blue. Adjust whatever height setting you want. Again, I think it's good to have a good variety. You have your tree density. And let's just click and see what we get with that. So let's say the conifers are going to be down in this area. And that gave us two really big ones there. Maybe we want them a little bit smaller. And there I got one. And then I'll make some back this way too. Maybe there's several back in this direction. And then maybe there's one big tree right here. So I'm going to go to Edit Trees again, Add Tree, and choose maybe the big tree or the broadleaf, one of the broadleaf trees. If I choose the big tree, add it in. This is kind of like an oak tree. It's an older version of a tree. You can find lots of other trees and resources on the asset store, some of them free. This one, I think I want it to be pretty tall. And not too dense. I really just want one there. So let's just try and see if we get one. We didn't get one. Maybe I'll pull my density up a little bit more and try it again. There, we got one. So let's see what that looks like if we play the game and we look around. There's that one bigger tree over here. It's kind of in shadow, so it's really giving me some shading on that. Maybe let's try a few more big trees. Maybe there's a strand of big trees in that area. So we'll go back, add another tree that is a broadleaf tree. And we'll see if we can add one right there, right beside our big tree. Maybe a little closer to us. There we go. So that one came out really big. Let me just see, that might be too big. That's a pretty big tree. Lots of shadow going on here. My shadows are very dark. So that's making it a little bit hard to see. That's actually two trees. It looks like I painted two trees right next to each other there, which is a little weird, but could happen. To make it so that this is a little bit easier to see, you might want to go to your window, rendering lighting settings again, and go to the bottom and look around at things like fog, or actually let's take a look at environment lighting, and let's see what happens if we move the intensity multiplier a little bit. And adjust the bounces a little bit. We've got a directional mode and we've got some fog here. I do want to put some fog in here, so I'm going to go and turn that on and set it to like a light blue. Kind of like a lighter, not too chromatic blue. Kind of like that maybe. And you know, if you're even on a clear day and you're looking, because of the atmosphere, if you're looking at mountains pretty far away, they're going to get a little bit bluer and a little bit lighter as they get further away from you. And Da Vinci called that atmospheric perspective. And we can set it so that it's either linear based on how far it's going. So if I were to put this like to 50, most of my mountains are going to be fogged out. And you'll notice that the skybox actually is not affected. So that's a limitation that you'll have to keep an eye on. But let's say I put this again to like 200, then the mountains in the game view look a little bit foggy. And you could do exponential or exponential squared, which drops off quicker, and then adjust how dense it is. So if I want just very little, I could put in 001, and then it's really almost not noticeable at all. But let's try 005, and then I just noticed the mountain in the background got a little lighter and a little bluer. So it's almost not even noticeable, but it's going to look a little more realistic. So that's a nice effect that you might want to put on there. You might want to turn off that fog when you're working on various things if you got to zoom out, because it will actually obscure your view in the 3D view. If I zoom out, you'll see the fog will actually obscure everything. But for now, I'll just leave it on. But let me go ahead and close that. And we might want to add another light in here that is not really meant to be a light that's going to have shadows on it. So my directional light's like my sunlight, but there's a lot of bounce light that should be there, and if I want to sort of fake that, I could add another light and not put shadows on and sort of fill in some of those really dark shadows. I could also just adjust my lighting so it's not coming down. This is sort of like a midday lighting, so the shadows are really, really dark. But I could try that. I could try another point light, or sorry, not a point light. Let's delete that, and let's create a directional light that's actually going to come from a different direction and not have any shadows. So no shadows, and maybe we'll make it not very bright. It might be even a little bit of blue. And then it would come from the other direction. So because this is not my sun, it's more of a bounce light. Maybe it's coming from the other direction. So if we move around here to see where our shadows are coming from, or from the main light, then maybe we want this to come from this direction here. And let's pull the intensity of that up using my virtual slider. And you see that's adding a little bit of light in there. I don't know that I want to use this, but I could, maybe it's kind of like light bouncing off the water there would be illuminating some of the scene. Now let's just see what that looks like. Okay, it's a little better. The trees look a little better. I'm seeing a little bit more of the green on the trees. Shadows maybe aren't quite as dark. They are still pretty dark. And I get some distance effect when I look off towards the distant mountains. Got some reflections on the water there. Okay, so let's stop that, and I'm going to move on now to the back to the terrain, and I want to go and paint some grass here. So some sprite grass. So it's going to be 2D grass that's image sprites that are going to be moving, and you can paint that with your paint details brush. It looks like some flowers, and it's right to the left of, it's to the right of the tree. tool and to the left of the cog tool. And we'll go down and we'll go to edit details. We want to add some grass texture. And there's something here, but it actually doesn't have anything on the texture 2D. So I'm going to click into the little circle next to it. I'm going to look up grass. It's alphabetical in here. And I want to find the ones that look kind of flat and they're like they're facing you. And they're called grass frond. These came in again with the standard assets. I'm going to select the first one here and go ahead and add it. And then we'll go and paint that a little bit by making sure it's selected. And when I go in and paint this, I'm looking at my brush size, and I'm just going to kind of stamp it in there. And I want to stamp some over here where the grass texture is. I'll go ahead and stamp some there. And I want to stamp some over here. Now, it may look like it's not doing anything, but if I zoom in, you can actually see that it did stamp some grass there. And your opacity is going to make it so that there are either more or less along with your target strength. I can hold shift down and I can remove some too that I've painted in if I decide that it's too much. And then I'll go ahead and go over here to where the character controller is, and let's put some in this area too. So maybe we'll add some there. Let's pull the strength down a little bit. And just add a little bit in some places there. And we can hold shift down and we can remove some too if it looks like it's just too much. And then we'll take a look at it. So if I look at it, I've actually got a lot of grass around me. It's really tall. And if I walk, I can see more of it. It's all around me. It's super bright green. So it might be too bright green. I might want to actually go in and adjust that by going and selecting on the terrain again. Select the brush and just double click it and it'll open it up, and you can adjust things like the height and the width of that grass. So there's a range, so you get a little bit of a range. And so max height is set to 2. Maybe that's just too high for this grass. Let's put 1.5 as the max height. And let's put min height at 0.5. So it'll make it generally shorter. And I did see it adjust a little bit in there. And you can also adjust the width if you want to. I think probably it's fine, but if I want a wider variety, then I can set the min to like 0.5, and that'll make some blades of grass even smaller. I also thought that the color of the grass was a little bit too bright for my scene, so I'm going to go ahead and make it a little bit more yellowish and a little bit duller. And I think that might look a little better. I'm looking at my scene, and that seems like it might be a little closer to more realistic grass. And I could change the dry color, which is a variety in there as well, to, but I'll go ahead and leave it. And then let's play it again, and let's see. Yeah, it's not quite so tall, and it's not so bright green. And you see it moves a little bit in the wind. And we don't really have a wind sound. It would be good for us to actually have a sound here of maybe some island sounds or wind sounds. So I can go to add component on this terrain and add an audio source, and then go in and plug in that audio source. I have from the assets I've loaded for the class assets a hillside sound, which we could go ahead and stick in there. And when I hit play, we'll hear some sound. There's a little bird sound, a little bit of a wind sound. You got the grass moving, so that's a little more realistic. And we could get those trees moving a little bit too if we put a wind source in here. So you could create under your 3D objects a wind zone. And a wind zone is going to, if I create that and I will place it, like to place it right around here, so I could drag it onto my first person controller and reset its cog icon so that it pops over right to where the first person controller is. Then I'll unparent it by dragging it out into this empty area in the hierarchy. That's a quick way of moving something where another object is, by parenting it to it and then resetting its cog and its transforms and then unparenting it again. So now this wind object, which looks like a big fan, is right here, and easy for me to select and adjust. And I can go in, and it's probably already got some on it. I'll just play it and see. And yeah, I can see that the trees are blowing quite a bit. Maybe like way too much. It's like a storm's coming. So I want just a little bit of movement on those trees. So I want to set some of those down. So I'll go ahead and like take the magnitude and set it down to maybe 0.1. And let's set the turbulence down to 0.5 too, so it's not so crazy. And let's see if that looks a little better. Still too much. We can set everything down a little bit. Let's set this down 0.52. Set the turbulence down to maybe 0.2, and let's set the pulse magnitude to 0.1 and see what that looks like. All right, that looks pretty good on these trees. Looks like the other large trees that I have are set to move a little bit more, so it still looks a little bit too much on those. Looks pretty good on the palm trees and the conifers. So I could keep messing with those, and the trees, there may be some settings that I can adjust on those as well for how much they move in the wind on the terrain itself. There are some settings over here on the cog icon of the train that you can adjust things like wind settings and bending. So that might be something that I want to adjust a little bit here. Actually, that's for grass, so that's not gonna. Thought the grass looked okay. But there is something for the trees, but I can't remember where it is right now. But if we stumble across it while we're adjusting things here, I'll go ahead and adjust that as well. So that adds all the different things that we can add here. We could add other grasses, like I could go in to the paint details and add another grass texture and use the same one that I used before and change the parameters. Or there's another one here that I could grab and change some of the parameters. So, you know, use a different color of green. You know, maybe this is more of a yellowish brown grass. So it goes from one yellowish brown to more of a almost a reddish brown color when it's dying, and maybe it's longer or shorter than the other one. So you know, we could go with a higher height. Maybe this one's maybe max 3 and starts at 2 as far as the height goes. And noise spread, let's put a bigger number in there, 0.3, and let's add that to it. And then we'll paint a little bit of that one in there, and we'll pull the strength down a lot so it's kind of sparse, and we'll just paint it in to where the other one is. And see what that looks like. You know, maybe that one is a different kind of grass that sort of grows in with the other grass, and we'll just see what that looks like. And we can adjust it, so you can see it's sticking up there, and there's a few right there. And if it doesn't look right, if we need to, say, brighten up the colors or something because it looks too dark, we can go back and adjust those different parameters on that particular grass by double clicking it and just, you know, pull that up so it's brighter. Pull this one up so it's a little brighter too. And if we want it to be a little wider, maybe we make it a little wider as well. And then try it again. Take a look at it and see, now it looks a little yellower, it looks a little better. And we could add some more of that in there as well. Okay, so we've got some things going on here that make it look interesting, and we could keep painting more grass and things on there as we go along. And looking at what it looks like once we get it painted on there. So I'm going to go ahead and move on now to some other types of textures that I want to put on here. So we saw what the difference was with normal maps, and some of the default ones look pretty good, but you're going to want to make your own. So I'm going to save this, and then I want to show you how to create your own texture maps. So that's what we're going to do next.